Okay, hello everybody, and welcome to Facilitating XYZ Live. My name is Sam Killermann, and I'm one of the co-hosts of this show. I'm one of the co-facilitators of Facilitating XYZ, which is a free online resource with books and articles and videos all about facilitation. This show is part of that resource, and in this show, our goal is to interview a facilitator that we admire or we look up to or we want to learn from, and do everything we can to learn from their craft, learn from their wisdom, to inform our facilitation, and with any luck, benefit folks who are tuning in as well. With that said, our guest today is Tanya Williams, and we're going to have her introduce herself in a little bit. But before that, Meg, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah. Hello, everyone. My name is Meg Bulger, and I'm one of the other co-facilitators of Facilitating XYZ and co-host of this show. And I'm really excited today to get to dig into and geek out about facilitation with Tanya Williams, who we got connected to through Kathy O'Bear, who was a former guest on the show, and who I imagine knows some other folks we've had on today because they've brought you up or you share some common facilitation spaces, which is awesome. So we're creating a little web of facilitators. So before I get any more into that, I'll just pause there and ask Tanya if you would introduce yourself and just tell folks a little bit about you.
Sure, and I want to say it's like, this blows my mind that we are all able to chat and be in communication, but I also am realizing, I'm like, my internet just went down, so it goes in and out apparently. So my name is Tanya Williams, and from an introductory place, you know, how far do we start back? I'm originally from Houston, Texas, and I live in New York City now. I'm based in New York City, and also spent some time out on the West Coast in Oakland. When I think about facilitation,
just as it was getting good.
Oh no! Did she? Oh. Okay, she's back. Can you hear us?
If you can, we can't hear you. You're currently muted.
I'm great. I'm here. I'm back.
You're back. You made the joke, and Google
it totally, yeah, Google is not having it. I love Google. Maybe that'll help.
So much.
So I think you heard Houston, you heard New York, you heard sometimes West Coast. Yeah. But talking about from a facilitator place, I just finished facilitating the leadership. I've worked in higher education for 22 years before leaving higher education and moving into coaching and consulting. And so I do social justice coaching and consulting with organizations, nonprofits, really almost anybody who will have me come in and facilitate, which is what I love to do. Prior to leaving higher education, though, I worked in multicultural.
Oh no! Oh, you're still there.
I'm still there.
Cut out for a bit and then you came back.
Yeah, it's the freeze. I'm gonna keep talking.
Okay.
I worked Associate Dean of Students for Diversity and Inclusion, Diversity Education. I've done some Chief Diversity Officer work, and so all things really looking at social justice, diversity, and education. I did my doctorate at UMass Amherst in their social justice education program, and I'm sure they will come up again because I feel like I learned a lot of my technique and way of being there. And did my degree in student affairs administration at Texas A&M University, and did my undergrad at Texas A&M as well. Awesome. I could keep going, but I'll stop there.
Well, I really appreciated the how far back to go, because I think that'll be my next question. Before I ask that, what I'm going to say about and like hope that this might fix our technology glitches is. Yes. So if you put your mouse over my face right now, there should be some bars or icons up here at the top, and one of them is 4 bars. Is that currently all the way filled? Like all 4 bars are white?
All filled.
Okay, so if you click on that and just drop it down a notch from auto HD to medium. Boom, now you are.
I will be here forever.
Hopefully. Best scenario. So best case scenario, that fixed it. But if nothing else, we're giving it a shot. So, all right. So one thing I would love to know, Tanya, is that was a really helpful kind of like overview of your like facilitation career and a little bit before that. And I'd love to dig back even further. Like, were there any like early experiences or the first time that you could remember kind of seeing facilitation in action and being like, ooh, this is an interesting thing that I'm watching, or feeling drawn to it? Anything jump to mind?
That is a fascinating question, because immediately I jumped to, I was raised in the Baptist church, and so it makes me think of, you know, I watched facilitation all the time in Sunday school, and it was more probably teaching, but in some ways, you know, the Miss Carter, Sister Carter, was standing up in front of us, probably trying to teach and facilitate. My mom is also was a substitute teacher of elementary school kids, and probably watched her. My dad was a deacon, so I think, you know, and I watched the facilitation, and I'll talk a little probably at some point about my understanding of facilitation. I watched people bring communities together. And so when I think of facilitation, I probably saw it most of my life. And I just probably, I didn't have the language. And now I just have the language.
Yeah, we often, when people reflect back on that, it's often interesting because you now are seeing those experiences through such a different lens, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Language helps form that lens. And I'm wondering, this might be a difficult question too, but I'm wondering if there are any experiences from your childhood that really inform your facilitation now, but then at the time you couldn't have ever known they would. Like a particular experience from childhood, adolescence, you mentioned university, you mentioned like grad school and all those things, that now you're like, oh, without that, I wouldn't do this work the same way that I do.
That is fascinating. So I think what I regularly go to is that I was bussed out of my working class Black neighborhood to a predominantly white, wealthy schooling for my whole schooling career. And so we're talking preschool. My mom drove me to that, but, you know, kindergarten, elementary, middle school, high school. And so I would say that had an impact on who I am as a facilitator, because I watched and probably tried to blend communities a lot, and make sense of bringing people together. And so I know that had an impact, and it surely had an impact on the type of facilitation that I do in the form of social justice facilitation, and why I do that. And so, you know, I can go back to, there's this distant memory of being on a playground and feeling like people were separate, and some part of me felt like, okay, that's not right, something's going on, and wanting to facilitate people coming together. And so, yeah, I feel like it has been in me a really long time.
Yeah, that's such a amazing kind of being able to see it so early. Is there a time that comes to mind where you're like, where you stepped into that role for the first time, whether or like in a memorable way, perhaps, rather than the first time, either formally or informally, where you really felt like, oh, I'm here to facilitate this connection? Yeah, whether it was formally or informally.
It's interesting that you say step, because one of the things I go to often in my mind is organization in high school, Lamar High School, Houston, Texas. It was called Students to End Prejudice. And so it was called STEP. And it's funny because I don't think that we actually facilitated. We really came together and met and talked about how we wanted to end prejudice. And this is, 1988, 1990. And so prejudice, that was the language and what high schoolers were able to talk about at the time. Now they're so far, which is so exciting to me. They're doing so much more, but that's what we were trying to do. I think about going to college. I feel like that is when facilitation locked in for me, because I was part of a student diversity peer education group at Texas A&M called UACT, University Awareness for Cultural Togetherness, and we got trained on a number of topics. My college mentor and friend now, Sherry Schmidt, really took some time with us to train us over a semester on all of these topics. Again, this was probably 1992, so still early, I think, work. But then we went out and facilitated a lot with student groups and student organizations. And so, yeah, I think that feels like the early parts for me.
Would you be up for talking more about Texas A&M?
Oh, totally.
Yeah?
Totally, yeah.
I'm curious. So I live in Austin, Texas. I don't know if you knew that or not.
Oh,
so I hear about A&M a lot.
that.
It's right down the road.
Yeah.
Okay. And A&M has been in a lot of national conversations, or at least I've been hearing about it in different reasons. And you mentioned like how differently now conversations around, diversity and social justice and inclusion, how differently they're playing out now versus when you were in that organization. And I'd be curious if you'd be up for talking about like that experience of doing that programming and doing that work at A&M when you were doing it, as compared to how you might see that work being done, even specifically at A&M, just kind of comparing that, even if you haven't been back there, just what are those differences that you might project or that you noticed if you've been back?
It's fabulous that you ask, and I've moved to I've kind of come almost full circle with Texas A&M and my experience with Texas A&M. It is my alma mater, and I will say at the time, 1990s to 96, 94 is when I did my undergrad, 96 was my master's. It was a tough place. And I'm a Black woman, and so let's be clear, it's still probably a tough place for Black women. And the work that we were facilitating then as undergrad students had a lot to do, or the way that I experienced that work had a lot to do with how I experienced my racial identity development. And so, all of that is playing in as a facilitator. And so when I facilitated then, I know that I was coming from a place of what do I need to do to talk about issues of diversity as a Black woman at a predominantly white institution. And I'll do whatever it takes to make sure that this predominantly white institution and the number of white people are here, get it. I want them to get it. And so I will bleed. I will, tell you the worst story in the world about my upbringing and my experience at A&M just so you can understand. And it didn't work, because that's not how facilitation works. And I have been back to Texas A&M first. I've gone back probably, it took me about 15 to 20 years to go back. And I've been back a couple of times in the last couple of years. And I was back actually twice this year. In February, actually it was January, facilitating a Posse Plus retreat. And then the College of Ag actually invited me back to do a workshop for them. And the institution, I believe, it has moved, and it still has a lot of work to do. And I think that the institution knows that. And my showing up as a facilitator, because I show up differently in my racial identity development now, I'm going to show up differently as a facilitator. So I think I showed up much more grounded. I was able to facilitate better because I had nothing, I had nothing to prove and nothing that I wanted from the participants. It really, I see it now as I'm moving people, or I'm offering them the opportunity to move their knowing or their understanding in a different way. And so the facilitation, you know, being back on campus, it was almost, I was in gratitude to get to see the development of the space, but also to see the development of me. And so, you know, I'm sure I still have some stuff that I need to work out with Texas A&M. And I can count it and then say it proudly, that's my alma mater. And that was not the case for a very long time.
I appreciate you sharing that so much, Tanya. And for anybody who's listening and who's not familiar with Texas A&M, I don't know, you can correct me on this. I think it's either one of the, if not the most racially homogenous campuses, definitely of its size in the country.
Yeah. And I think I actually don't know the exact numbers, but it kind of pulls from everywhere in Texas. And I'm not sure how long racially, well, I don't know how long folks of color end up staying at Texas A&M. It's like, because it is so homogenous.
Yeah,
there is a clear culture. Yeah, it's a predominantly white campus, and there's a clear cultural norm at Texas A&M.
Yeah, and you kind of already talked about where we really like to move this conversation next, which is like the work you're doing now. Can you give us just a glimpse of, is there a normal week for you? It sounds like already that there isn't. No. So what's your non-normal week? What's your non-normal month? Like, who are you typically working with? Like, tell us about the work you're doing now.
Sure. There is not a normal week. And I thought I made the mistake of thinking there would ever be a normal week. And I love that there's not a normal week because it keeps it fresh for me. So this past week was leadership. So I was in and am still in Boston for the week, having done a leadership session, national session. Can
you define leadership for folks who aren't familiar with that?
Sure.
It's so massive that I think we often assume, but yeah.
Yeah. So leadership is a national organization that is 31 years old, and has a number of, so they have 3 programs, but it's basically leadership wants and is working towards a vision of a world that is just, caring, and thriving, and that where people lead with integrity. And so all of our programs are about leadership, but it's leadership coming from a place of integrity and what it means to be a leader that lives and leads with integrity. And so, you know, I was just facilitating our 6-day institute. There is a 1-day Catalyst program and a 1-day resilience program. Catalyst is about having great conversations. Resilience is about how do we develop a resilience in our lives. So I was doing the 6-day institute, and I've worked with leadership now for since 1997. So I've been with the organization for a while. Last week, I worked with another organization based in New York and did a 5-hour workshop with them. I was out a couple of weeks ago doing the White Privilege Conference and facilitating some workshops there. Sometimes it's doing some writing. There's not a normal week, and it's all fun.
Yeah. So when you said like you've been working with leadership for almost 20 years, like that. So I'm really curious, is there when you said when you went back to your alma mater, you were able to see like, oh man, I'm now standing in that space so differently. And I'm only 5 years out of my alma mater, and I've already had that experience being a facilitator back on that campus. But I'm wondering, in leadership, I imagine there's also like this 20-year trajectory that you can kind of harken back to. I'm wondering, like, what jumps out to you when you think about like 20 years ago, if you did what you just did this last week, like what would have been different about you as a facilitator?
Well, I can tell you now, I wouldn't be having this conversation because I would be asleep. I would be exhausted. I would be completely laid on someone's couch, resting, because I think as a facilitator, I hold the energy different. When I was just starting out with leadership, to hold 6 days as a facilitator, and I'm an introvert facilitator, I was so in my head about what everyone else was thinking about my facilitation and the topics, and there was so much going on that when we finished, I was flat out. I was just done. So that is a huge change. And I think,
can I ask you, one thing before I'm sure there's so much more, but I'm wondering, is there the self-talk, or how did you let go of the self-critical voice that was like, what is everybody else thinking? And like, is there anything memorable from like when that was such a big prominent part of what facilitation looked like to like how that doesn't appear now?
That's a great question. I think because it's fresh for me with the Institute, there's a video that we show called Radiating Possibility. And one of the things is the video talks about quieting a voice in your head. And I literally tried on quieting the voice in my head. And so it was when I'd hear something, or I'd see someone having not even a reaction, I would try to read what someone was doing in the room, as opposed to letting that person just do that in the room. And if I wanted to know what was going on for them, asking. And I think that came by way of my dialogue training that I got at UMass Amherst, that we learned in dialogue that part of the work of the facilitator is to notice what's happening and not make any assumptions, and ask. And so that freed up a lot of energy of, okay, well, that voice in your head actually is creating stories that is not of service to you right now. And so let it go. And if you really want to know if that person's falling asleep because you're boring, ask them. Don't assume. They actually just may be tired. And if they are tired, what can you do to help care for them and have them care for themselves? And so I think that was a big part of, we do not have to be in the space of creating stories, and because there's content to worry about. And so why am I trying to create extra story? There is content that I need to be focused on, and curriculum that I need to be delivering, in addition to holding the group. So in some ways, it's like, not that I, as a facilitator, well, in some ways, yeah, I take a back seat to that my needs, I need to have dealt with my needs before, so that I can show up grounded and be ready to hold all that is going on. I know that there was another question in there. I'm fascinated because I think it's good to be dialogic. Meg, you said that you're 5 years out. So what has the change, what have you noticed from facilitating on your campus or your alma mater?
Yeah, so I had the opportunity to go back like 2 or 3 times, and I one of the first like memorable facilitations I did on my campus was with the student affairs like department. I didn't know that's what it was called at the time. That's definitely what it was. And it's a tiny college, so like all 20 of them showed up, like including campus safety, including the counseling center, like all of them. And I had an opportunity to work with a kind of similar group like last summer. And I remember giving them a task, and there was a rope involved, and the rope got tangled. And I just remember sitting there like, okay, the rope got tangled, like what's gonna happen now? And 2 or 3 of them were like, really had so much energy about like, we have to untangle it, like we can't just keep going, like. And I remember sitting there being like, there's just no way 5 years ago I could have sat here and just smiled and let the group do their thing. Like, no way, no how. And it was this moment of being like, man, that's what that looks like now. It's like, I'm literally able to be like, I don't care. Like, it bothers you. It bothers you. Okay. Like, do you want to do something about it? And just so hands off. So that's the first thing that comes to mind.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that is, so yeah, it took me 20 years to get there. So thumbs up to you, because yeah, 5 years, but 5 years out, I would have been like, what do I have to do? What am I supposed to be? They're looking at me to figure this out. So 5 years out, I'm impressed.
Tanya, are there other things that, as an introvert facilitator, I like that you named that, because that's how I would identify myself as well. And yeah, Meg too. And people always are surprised to find out that we're introvert facilitators. Same for you? Okay. Yep. So with that said, now that you've named that and outed yourself as an introvert facilitator, if there are other introvert facilitators listening who do get exhausted and who would be laid flat out after a workshop, are there other things that you've found that help you manage that energy beyond the not chasing those voices and spending all that energy in your head in those ways? Are there other things that you found that are helpful?
Yeah. Well, one, for any of the extroverted folks out there that might be confused, it does not mean that we hate people. So, and that's one of the ways that I work with my introversion, is that I tap into my love for people. I really feel like I tap into the marvel of the brilliance that is in front of me in the form of human beings. And so I use that as a way to tap into my gratitude that I get to do this work. And yes, there will be a point where I am no more good. So for example, leadership, we start at 8:30 and we usually go after our faculty meetings in. We are usually done about 11:30. And there are moments where people want to go and hang with the participants in the rec room or something. And I'm like, you know what? That's not me. I love y'all and I have spent the day with you. And so I know that I won't be my best self if I try to go hang. And I stopped telling my story, or telling myself a story that people are not going to like me, because I don't go hang out with them. I connect with folks in different ways. And so really, I think that tapping into, like, I really love people, and I have so much gratitude that I get to do the work that I'm doing. And gratitude, and this is from the resilience program from Leadership, is one of the ways that we develop resilience, that we really, return to gratitude on a regular basis, and that sustains me. One of the ways that I'm sustained.
Thank you.
So I'm wondering, do you co-facilitate a lot?
I do. I don't as much as I used to. When I used to do intergroup dialogue at UMass, and when I was in grad school, I did a lot of co-facilitation. I would say, I'm sitting here playing with my last few jobs. I'm like, yeah, there was some co-facilitation, but I've also done a lot of solo. So I love both.
Yeah. So now I have like different questions, but here's the one I was thinking about is, when you're co-facilitating, is there any particular ways that you work with, like, knowing that you're an introvert, and like is there any difference when your co-facilitator is an extrovert, and is there any particular ways you navigate that? Or if you're both introverts, is there any particular way that you ensure that you're navigating that with your co?
I think about a close friend of mine. We co-facilitated for a number of years in grad school, and I would think, I'm going to say that Elaine was and is an extrovert. And it's funny because I think that we both had a lot of, one, self-awareness, but then also awareness of others around us. And so we had a lot of conversation about our styles. And because we co-facilitated so often, we got really practiced at reading what was going on. And she had a way of noticing when I was done. And that we talk about each other as Cocos for life. And it was that kind of like, okay, you're done, right? I'm like, yep, I am. And it was that, I think with your co-facilitator, and I think that is super important, you've got to be connected, and you got to do the work beforehand so that when you get in the moment of co-facilitation, you not only can see, okay, what's going on for the other person, but that you can be in conversation during the facilitation itself. Elaine and I were, and we actually are getting to co-facilitate in June, which I'm super excited about. We were what we call transparent facilitators. And so we would turn to each other and actually have a conversation in front of the group. And I think we named that we were talking about what was coming up, but it was letting a group in on the conversation so that we could be connected. And so I think part of it is checking in afterwards and saying, this is what worked, this is what didn't work, but really being connected as a co-facilitator. I talk about whenever I work with co-facilitator, well, whenever I work with a co-lead, all of the institutes are meant to be co-led. I talk about my Leadership Institute co-facilitator as my cleanup batter, and I'm their cleanup batter in that I am watching what's going on for them and being able to support them the best way that they can so we can both knock a home run. I'm totally messing up a baseball metaphor, but but it's a constant support. And so when I worked with someone who is an extrovert and an introvert, it's communication, just stay in communication. I will say that when I've worked with other co-leads, I think with the Institute, who might also be introverts, and this is when we have access to many different styles, some of my extroversion comes out. And so, it's a barometer sort of like, so what's the pressure that needs to come up or down? And I believe we all are skilled enough to do that.
What are some things that you think, so you mentioned that like the first, when you started talking about introversion, you're like, for the extroverts out there who don't understand, what are some other misunderstandings that you think extroverted facilitators may have of introverted facilitators, misunderstandings, myths, whatever it might be, that would cause them to have internal voices in their head that aren't that accurate about their co-facilitator in ways that might be unhelpful to your relationship or to the relationship in the room?
I think probably introverted facilitators may use silence more often. And silence, talk about, particularly in the society we live in now, silence creates all kinds of stories in people's heads. And there may be stories around like, my co-facilitator is lost in what they're trying to do, or I need to come in and save them. You actually don't need to save anybody. We're just using silence effectively. And it's okay. I think, and this is my read, I'm reading into an extroverted experience, so I invite anybody who's an extrovert to correct me. But I think sometimes there might be a perception that we are tired or that because the energy is different. And so it's like, no, I'm actually fine. I'm just calm, or I am getting my information from a variety of places, and I don't need to be large in my movement or my voice, or I can. You don't, and so this. Oh wow, lots just went through my head. So there's, I think sometimes the read of introversion that the extrovert may think, oh, I've got to repeat it for my my introverted facilitator. I've got to repeat the directions. It's like, nope, you don't have to do that. But then what also went through my head was that sometimes can happen as a person of color with a white co-facilitator, that sometimes a white co-facilitator will come in and have to repeat. I'm like, nope, you still don't have to do that either. And so I'm like, there could be a lots of things that are working out, because most of my co-facilitations are cross race, and it is white with me as a Black facilitator. So there are lots of dynamics that are probably working out.
Yeah. So I have a question. You used a phrase in that answer, which I loved, which was like, I'm reading this onto like extroverted facilitators, and I invite those people to correct me. And I was like, that has to be something you use in your facilitation.
Mm-hmm.
And because it's just such a, like, as you were saying it, I was like, that is such a powerful phrase. And so I would love to know, two-part question perhaps, like how do you use that in your facilitations? And then also there's a level of which I feel like it is makes me nervous, like to invite people to correct me in live time. And so I would love to know like how you would advise somebody who was nervous, who was like, but if I do that, people will correct me in front of everyone, like how to navigate that fear.
So I do use it, and I think it is I think one of those facilitator techniques, and I use it probably a variety of ways that I have to think more about when I use it, but to help with the nervousness of being corrected, and corrected is in quotes, because all I'm doing is inviting someone to share their experience and their opinion and their perspective. And so, oh, I have to go check on the dogs. I'm sorry.
No problem.
I'm going to hold for a second.
Okay. It's so funny that was the question that you asked, because that was exactly the phrase that I was going to ask about. And I have a very different question, so I'm excited. Would you? Yes, nice. That's such a wonderful social justice educator phrase too. So I want to kind of dig into the idea of how that is something that social justice facilitators, I think, might be more tuned into, and how other facilitators might be able to benefit from that.
Beautiful. Yeah.
I heard the dogs barking, and I was thinking about inviting the dogs to correct us. Dogs wanted to.
They were invited to pause us when they felt that needed to happen, and that's exactly what happened. I feel like we should have some kind of commercial break ready. Well, now that we have this natural pause in the conversation, let's talk.
Go check out Facilitating.xyz.
Okay, yeah. that was more than I bargained for. The puppies were not so nice, so I had to let them in.
You mentioned you're staying with a friend.
Yes.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
After, and no, they're not my dogs, and they were outside, so they're inside with me now.
So Tanya, sorry, as you were, continue, please.
So you were asking about, bring me back into the question.
So how do you navigate the fear of inviting correction?
So Yeah, and I'm staying with the correction in that it really, the invitation is about having someone share from their perspective. And so if I am grounded in my perspective, if I'm grounded in what my truth is, what my values are, it doesn't feel like they're attacking who I am. And so I do want to invite, because my understanding of facilitation and the root, if you look up facilitation in the dictionary, is to make something easier. And so I am not in opposition to any of my folks that I facilitate, that are participants. I'm not in opposition at all. And so, you know, I don't worry. I used to worry a lot about, like, oh my gosh, I want to show up as an expert, and I want to, you know, everybody's looking at me to do this right. I let go of that, and woohoo, everything's got better. It's so much better. So much better.
Yeah.
Do you do trainings with other, or how often, I'm just going to assume you do, how often do you do trainings with other facilitators or trainings of trainers or that type of work, like that more meta work?
I actually don't do as much as I used to. I love training the trainers, actually, because facilitation is so cool to me. It is just, it's an art. It is a true art. And so to get to train other people who want to make things easier and more comfortable, and really invite conversation and connection, I want to train as many people as possible. I have done them in the past. I've done, again, intergroup dialogue, did some work with that when I worked at Mount Holyoke College. And so we trained intergroup dialogue facilitators and took them through a semester-long class before sending them out to facilitate dialogues. But yeah, training the trainer, it's some of the most fun work, because you get to, it is meta in that it's like, okay, so this is the content and process, and let's look over again and look at the larger process. What is going on? Yeah.
Okay. I'm happy that you've done it and that you're excited about it. And I have the first question that I have of, like, my list of 4 about this. But the first question I have that I've actually wanted to ask is, have you encountered the difficulty that newer facilitators and newer trainers have with that ability to let go of that need to be the expert or to need to be, like, correct? Okay. How do you help? What have you seen to be successful in helping someone start to, like, even if it's just the first, like, glimpse of them letting go of that need? Like, what have you seen work?
I'm thinking of what popped in my mind was developing a level of trust of themselves. And I was working with my partner's best friend, who is a doctor. So she's a trained pediatrician, and she was leading a workshop. She wanted me to come in and lead a workshop on diversity within doctors, you know, what is it? Residency training. And I said, well, I can't do it, but you could. And she's like, what? I couldn't do that. There's no way. I'm a doctor. I'm not a facilitator. And we're talking about these social justice issues and diversity. And so I sat with her and another doctor, and basically most of the work that we did for the 2 hours of train the trainer that we did was around them knowing that they cared about the issues. They did not have to have all the answers, and they could handle anything that happened in the room. And so a lot of the foundational work is, for me, there is content. You want to have content there, and an understanding of how groups work and pedagogy. But I think some of the most foundational work is that we are capable human beings. And so trust your brain. Yeah. Trust your brain. You know?
One of the other things that came to mind, you said earlier, like, I know my truths, I know what I believe, and like they're not going to hurt me by saying, they're not going to hurt me, or they're not going to be able to like destabilize what I'm trying to do by sharing theirs. I think that there is an unfortunate myth within facilitators, or a pressure they feel to have no views. I am just
Oh,
a
no.
party here, and I am just here to make things happen, as if that's possible. And I feel you already have things to say, so I don't even need to ask the question. I'll just neutrality.
Right. So okay. Neutrality is, for me, it is a myth. And I'm thinking about my work with the Posse Foundation, because as facilitators, we are to be, neutrality is part of the work that we do. And I think it's how people understand neutrality.
Okay.
I think actually, and I think of this work with leadership as well, that I don't actually need to bring my agenda and sit it in the middle of the room and have you believe in my agenda. But I get to have an opinion because I'm a human being. I am not a blank slate. And if we are really doing social justice work, I actually need to be present in the room. All of me needs to be present in the room. And that doesn't mean that Tanya Williams, the Black, queer, race, working class, living middle class, able-bodied, cisgender woman person, works out all of her issues on everybody in that room, but I bring everything with me. And so with all of those identities, there is no way I'm neutral. There's no way that I'm neutral in this, particularly in this world that we're living in right now. I would be lying if I was a facilitator, and it's absolutely impossible. And that may not be the place, and that is not the place for me to try to convince you of my view from those identities. But to have them be present, I think, and this feels judgmental, but any facilitator who is saying that they are neutral, they have a gift that I don't have.
I like how you turn that from judgmental to oddly clever. Tanya, one of the other questions that I had around training of trainers, and this is like a perfect thread that we're pulling through for this, is the idea of going into that in a socially just way. Like, how does one approach training of trainers or train the trainers in a way that doesn't reinforce harmful power structures or doesn't reinforce injustice, especially if you're trying to do work that is pushing against injustice or work that is socially just. Do you have thoughts about that? How does one do that in a socially just way?
I think situating the facilitators, well, one, doing some work around identity, helping your facilitators really know what their identity means. And so that means having them understand the lens that they bring with their identity, but then how those identities are situated in a current oppressive structure, oppressive structure that we live in. And so what's the power that they bring because of their identities, and how does that work out? I would think, and I also bring some language of liberation in there, that I try to bring to do the work of oppression education and social justice education through a lens of liberation, that we all have skin in the game, and that sounds awful. But we all are impacted by this. And so it's not anybody, no one is unaffected by oppression. And so when I show up as a facilitator, that means all of my identities are present. And I need to know that as a facilitator. And so besides foundationally, so the next, I guess, foundation, besides having some self-trust, the next foundation would be a thick chunk of learning around identity and situation of identity in a system of oppression. If there is a train of trainers without that, I don't know if it is as effective as it could be. Yeah.
Yeah. I couldn't agree more. And I asked that because talking about that myth of neutrality, so Meg and I do train the trainers together, and often we hear it 100 times in the first day, well, we're supposed to be neutral, be neutral. And when we hear that word so many times, we realize we need to do some work around this. And it is so often the folks who, so we've moved people through that, which is nice, through that want for neutrality. And that myth, or people who don't see that as a myth, so often haven't checked the biases that they hold, or haven't named the biases that they hold, or they're seeing some aspect of themselves as invisible or as like normal, and enacting that, right? So it does require that work, without question. And are there other things that you think it requires? Like, are there other things that it would require for somebody to, as a facilitator, recognize that neutrality is potentially non-existent, and how might you help somebody recognize that?
So when you said the word neutral, for some reason in my head, a car in neutral popped up.
Okay.
And I hope that this is a good metaphor, that a car in neutral can quite literally be pushed anywhere. It can be pushed somewhere it does not want to go. And so there's no way I could be as a facilitator, I don't want to be neutral, because I won't be able to hold a group with my full strength if I'm in neutral. It's like, the group could push me anywhere. And I'm supposed to be creating a strong container for that group. I'm supposed to be being able to hold the group where it is, so that it can go wherever it wants to go. I, as the facilitator, cannot go wherever the group wants to go. Does that make sense, that there are two different things going on? Totally. And so when the other piece of this, and so the people not examining their biases, so some of my work, my dissertation work, was around internalized subordination and internalized racism. And so a lot of my thinking right now is around the ways in which internalized subordination and internalized domination across all identities really impacts us in general, but specifically as facilitators. And so when I think about a train-to-trainer, there's the thing of, if you are neutral, you could go anywhere. But also, if I have not done my work around my internalized dominance, I am going to impact the group in particular ways, and probably impact my co-facilitator if they have different identities than I do. And if I have not done my work around internalized subordination, I'm going to impact the group. And I'm going to show up in ways that are not helpful, or as strong as I can be to actually hold that container. And so, okay, we have the foundation of personal self-work. We have the foundation, the next little piece of, doing the foundational identity and situation of oppression, and the internalized, however you internalize that system of oppression, and that it's manifesting all the time.
Yeah. And you can't, it's just, you can't be, actually, before I'm so into this, the fact that we're now developing some sort of a curriculum, but before I keep going to that, can you define for anybody watching or listening, in a brief sketch, like what you mean by internalized subordination and internalized dominance?
Sure. So There's a system called oppression that we're all a part of, that has harmed us. It's, you know, it's based on history, and it's based on systems and policies and practices. And there are ways, and I've been talking about it lately, as it is a toxin that we all have drank. And we've all ingested it, and it is manifesting in us in ways that, if we have identities that have been subordinated in this system of oppression, that act out that subordination, because it feels like that's where we're supposed to be. And if we have dominance, or dominant identities or privilege in this system of oppression, we have internalized, and therefore we act out our dominance most of the time in ways that are not conscious to us. And so that's the internalized piece, that it is in our very breathing and thinking and belief system. And so we've internalized it so much that we don't have consciousness of it. And we often, from an internalized subordination place, are at a place of what's wrong with me, and at a internalized dominance place, it's like, what's wrong with them because I'm so great. And it's all a lie. It's all a lie. We've ingested a lie. And so our work, when we look at internalized subordination and domination, is what part of the lie is, one, not serving us, and how can we unlearn what we've learned, and how can we begin to heal ourselves, and not just people who are in subordinated identities. People who are in dominant identities have to heal as well from the toxin of oppression.
Yeah.
Hey, Meg, I know you have a question, and I just want to just add the neutrality thing there, Tanya. Like the way that it often shows up, and I see this and I hear it in my own head, is not even that I'm better. It's that, oh, what do you mean me? Like in this space, like the neutrality of an internalized dominance is, oh, like I'm not even in this space. What do you mean me? This isn't about me. Like we're not about my manness in this space. This is just, you know, me as a doctor, or me as a whatever. So it's just that invisibilization as well, right?
Yeah.
Now that myth and neutrality comes in, for me in my head, is that internalized dominance is, you don't notice it. Oh no, this is madness. This is the fact that I'm just good at this job. Okay, let's talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, totally. Yes, and that's the entitlement, the normalization.
That's the myth that you are neutral, not even that your opinions, but that you, the person, have the capacity to be neutral, which I do. Oh no, that's a whole new level to that I hadn't I've never said that to somebody. Like, you think you have the ability to be neutral because you think you are a neutral party, that you're just a person. And whew, that's a whole another level to
curriculum.
I think you're super right on that, everyone. That lie is deep. That's a deep lie. Yeah. So one of the things that you mentioned earlier, you again, like you have these beautiful phrases. I've nothing to prove, and I don't want anything from participants. Like, I'm just here to provide an opportunity. And I thought that was like, that's a place that I see, like I see other people able to do, and I see myself wanting to get to, but like, I'm not there yet. Like, I know I'm not there yet. And my question, or the thing I'm kind of wondering if you can help me with, is like, what help? I'm going to assume you didn't start there, because even in your story earlier, right, you mentioned like, I will do anything you want if you will believe what I believe. And that's a big transition from like, I will do whatever you want if you believe what I believe, to I am not here to get anything, like, don't want anything from you. So like, any like bits or touchstones of enlightenment that could help somebody who sees themselves as like, I want to get there. I know that will allow me to do things that I can't now, but I'm not. Like, I know that I'm not.
It's interesting you say that and ask that question, because as part of leadership, we had kind of a commencement, and I got to offer some words to the students. That work, I think, those touchstones came by way of me doing my work around internalized subordination. And really, because I would show up in a subordinated frame of mind as a facilitator, and it's not effective. And so doing that work around internalized subordination, and specifically around internalized racism, and I think of my dissertation, I did lots of work around internalized racism for my dissertation. It allowed me to know that and I shared this with the students, that I am enough as I am. And that, to me, strengthened me as a facilitator. That, what you're saying around, I don't need anything from the participants, that we're all in this work together. And I do believe it's somewhat around the perspective that I take, that we actually are all on the same team. That even the person who is in mad resistance with me in workshops, and I'm like, oh, we're actually on the same team. And you might not know it yet, but I don't have to be in opposition to you. And so that allows me to show up in a compassionate space. So compassion, another part of that resilience stuff. I think that helps me to, really show up like, we're here together. Let's have fun in this together. And that, one more thing, I immediately, it is the feeling of fun and liberation. And I posted a Instagram yesterday. My co-facilitator, we dance a lot at Leadership, and my co-facilitator was getting down. He was having a good time, and I posted a video of him dancing, and I said, if we cannot have fun, the revolution will not happen. It just won't, because we will be pulling from like empty stores. We will be pulling from empty places in us that will not heal anything. And so I'm doing social justice work. I've got to come from a liberatory space. I've got to come from a compassionate space, so that I can sustain myself in this work for the long haul. So I may have gone off there.
No, the thing that came to mind when you were talking at the end was like, if you are trying to genuinely invite someone into these new opportunities or into that more liberatory space, like, you have to believe it's a good space to be in, right? That there has to be some like aspect of celebration or joy or genuine, like, this is like, I'm coming from a great place to this work. And if I'm going to provide an opportunity for you to come on over here, right? And it's, I think that's a completely different ball game than like, I need to prove that your world is wrong, or that what you're thinking is wrong, so that you can see my way, right? I could spend the rest of the conversation unpacking what you just said right there. And I know Sam got more to jump on you.
It connects to a belief that I have, and this is a principle that I bring to my work. It's my own. I think the doctor's oath is a Hippocratic oath. My own work. Every time I move into a space, I do no harm. I am to do no harm to anyone in that space. And if I do harm, and it is out of my own ignorance. So one, that's a problem. I got to keep doing my own work. And two, I've got to repair and respond and be with. And so it is still in the service of doing no harm. And to me, that's what liberation is about. If I'm really wanting to help people understand what liberation is. And what I'm trying to do is give them, I guess, give us all another perspective that, like, this thing, the status quo or oppression that we're doing clearly does not work. It has not worked for anybody. We are slightly confused that it has worked because people look like they're well. And I would say most of us are not. And so I'm saying, like, over here in liberation, wow, feel that energy. Feel that space where we are connected. Feel that space where you actually can be all of who you are. You can be authentic. That's why I named my company, my organization, my consulting and coaching, Authentic. It's like, because I actually think we are all going to be better when we're in that space.
Tanya, how do you, so I've been noticing in workshops a lot recently, and this has been like the frequency has been going through the roof, that people are coming into social justice spaces with a very strong sense. These are people who are neutral to oppositional to the idea. So these aren't people who are going voluntarily, like maybe it's a classroom or an intact group. And they're coming into the training with this idea that social justice is like weaponized shame to a degree. And it's not about liberation or about them. And it's in many ways about making them feel bad. Okay. What tools, like what facilitation tools, like what do you reach for? What do you do when you encounter that? When you have someone telling you, like, you don't care about me, you want me to feel bad about myself or whatever it might be, and you in your head know that's not true. I do care about you. I don't want you to feel bad about yourself. You're bound in this liberation as well. Like, what tools do you use? What tricks do you have up your sleeve? Like, whatever, like, framework for this question works for you. Like, how do you encounter that person in a facilitation setting? What do you do?
I tap into myself first. And I'm thinking of a recent facilitation where someone who had a different belief system than I did, I think exhibited a lot of what you're saying. It's like, okay, you're wanting to shame me because you're saying anything about oppression, or you're saying the word social justice, so that means that you are in opposition to me. I'm like, actually, we're probably not. But I tap into myself first, and I really tap into Tanya. Like, sometimes it is physically moved towards, but I think you're asking to come into the world up here. The world up here is a visual place where I am, like, energetically moving towards someone. I am literally energetically moving towards them, and probably silently speaking, like, we are together in this. And so there might be the feeling of, I see the resistance and I offer compassion to the resistance. That somewhere, someone that may have talked about liberation, or you saw something on the news or something, someone has hurt you that was talking about social justice, and I'm not that person. And we are in this together. I actually need you. I don't do all of this probably in the moment. I probably do it more internally, but it is that feeling of, because I believe, and I said this to the students today, Dr. King said, I can't be what I ought to be until you are what you ought to be. And you can't be what you ought to be until I am what I'm supposed to be. And so I need you to be yourself that is at full strength and conscious and aware. And so it's first this piece of, I am not in opposition to you. And it may be about energy that I do that with someone. And then it really is a space of listening that I have practiced, and I think do some version of reevaluation co-counseling now that says that people have been harmed, and that if they receive good listening, there is some healing that gets done there. And so I can truly deeply listen all day because I want people to be healed. And so the resistance, and Dr. Jamie Washington, Reverend Dr. Jamie Washington talks about all the time, the reframing resilience. Man, that workshop, I went to that workshop probably like 5 or 6 years ago, just broke me open, because I'm like, right, we're not in opposition, and it is just resistance. It is, I actually get to see the person in their resistance, have compassion for that resistance, tap into the space where I have felt my own resistance and fear that, I may be losing something, or you're asking for a shift, and to say that we're in this together. And so it is a conscious decision to move towards people when I experience resistance in workshops. And then sometimes it's hard. I had a facilitation, we had a activity we did star power during leader. Maybe shouldn't have said that. No, that's okay. Star power is part of leadership. I'm like, wait, no, it actually is written. But star power is one of those activities that's like lots of resistance can show up. And there was some resistance that showed up in the room, and I could feel myself, like I felt the trigger coming up, and I was like, oh, I'm noticing my own stuff, and oh, I'm noticing their stuff. If I'm having to deal with my own, there is a lot that goes on in that second, but yeah, move towards, that is my answer to my own, when I notice resistance, move towards, like, yeah, compassion. That was a very long answer. I hope I answered something.
You really did. You did.
Lots of big things too. So a layer to that, you said I can deeply listen all day, and I believe in the healing power of that. And I'm with you. I don't know. I'm not with you in the I don't think I can listen all day. I don't think I've gotten to that place, but I do believe in the healing power of like hearing somebody's story, hearing them out, hearing where their pain comes from in particular. And what I want to know is the difference between giving a platform for somebody to say a bunch of hard stuff. I was going to say hateful stuff, hard stuff, painful stuff, oppressive stuff. The difference between giving them a platform for that and then knowing that listening is incredibly important.
Yeah.
How do you balance those things?
So some of that is also about watching the group. So part of my do no harm is to not let anyone else get harmed. And so I'm doing my work to do no harm, but part of my work is to interrupt harm. And so I'm watching, I'm paying attention to the group, I'm panning, I'm noticing what's going on in the group, how are people responding. And I don't, some facilitators struggle with interrupting. I don't. I do not struggle with interrupting. And that's part of the moving towards. Sometimes the moving towards is that technique of, I'm gonna soon put my hand on your shoulder and ask you, what's your point? Where are you going with this? We wanna hear you. And you're watching me do it right now. I see this person right here. I am with you, and it feels like you have, it sounds like you have a lot of feelings coming up. What is the point that you're wanting to make? And so getting in there, when I see the veer, I'm like, sometimes there's a straight street, and then there's the veer, and I'm like, oh, the veer is not where we agreed that we would go, so we're going to come back. And if I'm watching the group and the group is having a response to that, I'm asking the group about what is your response to this? I'm not letting that be the last word.
Right.
And that's when I go into, there is sometimes facilitation light, and then there's facilitation heavy. That's facilitation heavy. That I'm like, no, I'm actually, as a facilitator, trying to make this easier for everyone. And so I need to insert myself and really direct the group a little bit more. And then when I sense that, okay, they can hold themselves now, I'm back to holding the container.
Yeah.
And that I feel like I learned in dialogue facilitation, because it is meant, people talk about it as difficult conversations, but dialogue is meant to engage the difficulty, or rather to stay in despite the difficulty. And so the facilitation has got to be strong, because you're ready. You got to be ready for the struggle and the disagreement, and the people sometimes getting on the soapbox and saying, this is my belief. It's like, well, that can be your belief, and your belief right now is doing harm. And so I'm not going to call you out, and I'm not going to attack you or anything like that, but I will not let your belief do harm. Not in this space.
What you were saying was when you said the veer, I was like, oh, I know exactly what you're talking about. Like when somebody says like, I feel shame, right? Or I feel like people are telling me I'm a bad person. That's real, right? Like that's that moment where they're with you and you're with them and you're like, oh yeah, that is not fun.
It's hard.
And then all of a sudden they're like, and it's because of, and you're like, no. Like, right? Like that first moment, you're like, okay, we can be in this together. But that second moment, you're like, and a soapbox, right? And that is, you also can almost see them move, right? From their body, like right up into their brain, or like right onto where they read that thing.
Yes. And you just named it perfectly. That when you are fully, like when someone is connected, heart, body, mind, everything's working, it's right there. And then there is a movement up here that it's like, oh yeah, and I'm supposed to make people feel bad because of this. And I'm like, no, that's not what we're doing right now. You might be able to do that somewhere else, but you're not going to do it in this space. Yeah. And I think that is okay as a facilitator. I take the groups very seriously. I take the space very seriously. I want my facilitation work to be healing and productive towards the end of oppression.
And that's like an agenda, right? Like that's your agenda. And I keep bringing us, I guess, back to this idea of neutrality, because one of the things that I feel pushes against that is that idea that this is supposed to be a neutral, facilitated space where everyone is equally welcome, and there's like the facilitator isn't pushing us towards any particular direction. And what's funny is in this way, like in this anecdote, Meg and I do safe zone trainings together, and a lot of people who are in those trainings, a common pushback is like, well, like the platform that gets made is that this is supposed to be a safe space, and like it's not a safe space if I can't say these things, or why aren't we doing these things? I'm like, well, it's not meant to be a safe space equally for everybody. It's meant to be a very particular type of safe space. We're trying to build a very particular type of outcome. And in trainings that Meg and I have been doing, we've had like potential facilitators be like, well, it sounds like you're naming an agenda. Like it sounds like how can you create a space that's safe for everybody if you're saying that this person who has like really homophobic beliefs isn't able to share those, but this person who has really anti-homophobic beliefs or very like queer positive beliefs is allowed to share those. And like by saying that one of those is allowed and one of those isn't in this space. And it's funny because we see people look at us like, wait, you aren't allowed to say that, or you're not allowed to have that like perspective. And I give all of this as context for a question that I'd like to ask, which we haven't asked before, so by all means, you can go out of this one. But it's, are there things that you do in that holding the container? Are there things that you do that other facilitators would be like, Tanya does this thing and I don't think that's okay? Like, are there any things you do that are maybe against the conventional wisdom or against the norms or against what you feel like the facilitator expectations are, but that you see go really well?
I imagine some people, I have, and again, this is not Tanya putting herself front and center, but I've cried during facilitation before. And I would say that most facilitators say that that's not okay. Because that, for me, is a part of authenticity, and not cried like boohoo, I can't contain myself. But like if I am feeling something passionately, for example, and I keep going back to leadership because it's fresh. I didn't cry on this one, but usually when I talk about my vision and what I'm passionate about, which is a world free of oppression, I have some feelings connected to that. And it's not feelings from a place of, you know, because I'm a Black woman, but it's quite literally feelings of, oh my gosh, we would all be so much better without these chains of the suppressive system. And what would the possibilities be if we lived in that vision? And so I let my feelings come up. And again, it's not, I don't center myself and have people taking care of me, but I believe that is authentic facilitation. And so I would assume probably most facilitators would say, oh, that's not okay.
And actually, before you go on, how do you do that in a way that doesn't center the experience on you? Or how do you do that in such a way that it's not about the participants taking care of you? Because I completely agree with you that that can be that. And I also agree with you that that is authentic facilitation, right? I mean, it'd be inauthentic to pretend you don't have those emotions.
Right.
But how do you do that in a way that doesn't center it on you, or doesn't invite that caring from, or that group feeling like they have to now take care of you?
Yeah, I don't, it's a acknowledgement of the feeling, but not a give in to the feeling. So I don't stay there very long. It's like, oh, wow, there's a tear rolling down my face. And I'm like, wow, I have some feelings about that. And I move on, but I don't say, whoa, that's a tear. And wow, I want, and just, yeah. And this is connected to my belief that facilitators have to develop practices of mindfulness so you can be present and stay present to what's going on. That I am noting that I have some feelings. And just like the breath, I return to where I'm supposed to be in that moment. So yeah. So that's and then the participants will understand, because people are wise, that I'm fine. I'm fine having feelings, and, you know, I'm not going to get all caught up in and they don't need to now help me get back to where I was facilitating before. And I will say, be present to, like, I use stories a lot as self-facilitation, or using instrument as self in my facilitation. So I'll tell stories and give examples. My family I'm sort of, my partner, my girlfriend is a comedian. And so as comedians, it's like you always hear stories about their families and everything. And I'm like, I'm not a comedian, but man, my family shows up a lot in my facilitation. But I choose the stories that I tell very particularly. If I still have some work to do around that story, that is not the story that's supposed to show up in my facilitation. I remember, I don't think it was during leadership, it was some other time, I think I told the story of my coming out to my parents, and I wasn't ready to tell it. And it showed up, and it took me a second to come back. And I'm like, oh, you're not ready to tell that story yet. It is useful. And now I can tell it, no big deal. And I use it in so many different ways. But get clear on the stories that you're able to share. like speaking from my passion about my vision, you know, it's a tear.
Okay.
But if I'm telling a story that I'm not ready to tell, that's when you really are needing to be taken care of, because you have completely moved yourself out of that space. So do your work, and trust yourself, if you've done your work, to tell the stories that work, or that are effective and that won't pull you out too far out of the moment.
So, Tanya, one of the things that you, like, we just talked about emotions right there, and and I think that I feel like we're talking about a lot of like facilitator fears, but facilitators have a lot of fear because there's a lot of opportunity for like facilitation. To me, is literally inviting opportunity for it to go a place that you didn't plan. And one of those things I think is about like inviting emotions into a room. And what I'm wondering is, and I think social justice facilitators have often thought about this because they have inappropriately shared, or they have like like said something that they're like, whoop, not ready for that one, right? But like and emotions are very high in social justice facilitation. So there's a consciousness of feelings and emotions that is good and helpful. But I don't think that's necessarily true for all facilitators, or even all social justice facilitators. So what I'm wondering is there anything that you do, or you believe, or you know about inviting emotions into the room, or about when emotions come into a room, that like you do, or you think social justice folks do really well, that like you wish like, oh, if all facilitators could just like operate from this place, like their participants would be safer, or emotions would go better in those spaces?
So this is so fascinating. Two things came to mind, and I'm gonna, so one, you defined facilitation so beautifully and connected why I want, one of the ideas and dreams that has come to my mind is having some sort of training for people who actually aren't facilitators, to help them understand that they can facilitate their own lives. That, you know, learn the skills learn the skills of facilitation, so that you can get in these conversations and not freak out that, you know, it's all going to go bad. Because I think dialogue is going to be a healer, and we're afraid of dialogue because dialogue invites the unknown. It completely invites the unknown. And the more that we can get comfortable with that, the better. I think the other piece is, it just flew out of my head now. So that facilitation is the invitation of the unknown, being okay with emotions. And this is probably going to sound odd, but nobody's going to die. Nobody's going to die. Emotions, Barbara Love, Dr. Barbara Love, one of my faculty members in social justice ed program, would always say that you know what emotions are there for? And we'd say, what? And she'd say, to be felt. That is it. That is absolutely it. They are there to be felt. And that just broke open everything for me. Like, oh, I don't actually have to be afraid of them. They're emotion. They are only emotions. And they're giving me some information. They're giving me some information about what's going on in the room for other people. They're giving me some information about myself. And they're actually kind of helpful. And so it really, I got in a practice in my facilitation, because I used to be terrified of people crying, mostly because I was afraid of myself crying. I was terrified when I cried, and I didn't know what was going on, and you know, it was just all scary. And then I got in my mind, like, I don't actually have to be afraid of that. And so when someone would cry in a workshop, and this is a repeater, I moved towards them. it was that kind of like, oh, I don't have to be afraid of your emotion. And it is only emotion. And that sounds so simple, and I know it's not, because I've been at a place where emotions terrified me. And I also do not want to displace that anger. People have stuff sometimes around when they see anger, and we can dig into, you know, how identity is connected to that. And so anger sometimes is terrifying for people because of their own life experiences. And it's all about how we do our work around any emotion that is scary for us. Like, why is crying scary? Why is anger scary? And what is the work that I need to do to, again, show up whole as a facilitator? Sounds like I'm like flippant about it, but I'm not. And it, for me, has been that simple. Yeah. This is like years of work. So let's be clear.
I mean, simple and easy, completely, right? Like, to me, it's very simple. It can be very simple, but it is not easy. So
right.
Sam, what were
Yeah, I was gonna say, so Tanya, when you were right, even before you said the anger thing, I was feeling like, or I was hearing that the emotions and moving towards that from the place of my gender identity, from like a manness place. And it was interesting because I was like, you know, this conversation, of course, is being social justice educators, identity is coming up a lot, it's important. And we also want to appeal this conversation to people who are outside of the social justice world. Like, I think that us occupying that world, like, we can see things in our lens of facilitation that are beneficial to other facilitators. And I wonder if there are some, so that idea of the emotions, and I was hearing my gender identity, was me thinking like, oh, I do that as well. And I was like, and I bet a lot of other men don't. Or the idea of like anger. And then when you brought that up, I was like, oh, I'm thinking about that from this other lens. And I'm just wondering if when you work with a lot of different groups, because you mentioned like a kind of a broad swath of different like professions and people, are there for facilitators who aren't intimate with social justice, or that's not really their jam, so to speak, is there kind of like a quick sketch of like, hey, here are the different times that you'll often, or that if you pay attention to it, identity is showing up in your facilitation. And these are things that you might want to tune into, like a frequency that you might not be aware of. And like when emotion comes up, it's probably one of them. When anger comes up, it's probably one of them. Like, I know we could probably say everything. Are there some like, ones, right? Are there some important ones, or some like, if you notice in these 5 spaces, or maybe people don't usually notice in these 3, like, are there some like highlights there that are coming to your mind?
I want to make sure that I'm understanding the question.
Yes,
are you, well, are you asking about what are the things that are happening in the room that actually might be about identity, or?
Yes.
Okay.
That a person who isn't a social justice educator or facilitator might not realize is more about identity than it is about the ropes course, or is more about identity than it is about we just did Lego facility. We had an interview with folks who are Lego facilitators. It's not about the Legos right now, it's about identity.
Ooh, that's a big question. And I say it's a big question partially because I learned my facilitation through that lens. And so I'm literally trying to pull them apart. That, you know, I think that there is an equation that happens in my head that produces this because I've just been taught in that way. And so I'm trying to think like, well, one, noticing like who's in the room, you know, do a scan. And I'm thinking about a workshop that I did for a law firm, civil rights law firm in New York. And this is my first time working with the law. Well, it was my second time working with a law firm, but I haven't done a lot of work with lawyers. And so I've been in nonprofit spaces and higher education spaces. And so I think I made some assumptions around how people understand all of this stuff. And I say stuff, identity, social justice. I'm like, everybody's got this, right? no, everybody does not have this. And I think the best language that I can use is that it felt like they were in resistance, just flat, like everybody was in resistance. And I was like, okay, there's something going on. And it's not about the topic. We were talking about implicit bias. And there was silence, tons of silence, noticing dynamics. So all of the partners who were white were sitting on one side, all of the people of color who were junior partners or interns or administrative staff were sitting on the other side. When people spoke, most of like the responses to questions or conversation, it was mostly from the partners. I'm like, oh, there is identity that's going on here, but there's also power. And so power is connected to identity. And therefore, you know, I finished one day of a 4-hour training with them, and I had a second day the next day, and I went home to a colleague, and I was like, oh man, I see this going on, but I'm terrified as a facilitator because it is going to be a lot of work because they're not as familiar with this identity stuff and don't use that language. And my wonderful friend said, you know, you have to do it because you have to be authentic to yourself as a social justice educator. And so I went in the next day and I said, so I need to name and show you what I'm seeing from my lens. And I delineated things and essentially asked them, so there's a dynamic, there's a power dynamic that is at play, and I don't want to name it about identity, but this is what I'm seeing. So I want you to be able to talk about it with yourselves. And in that facilitation, I said, do you want to talk about it as a group, or do we need to break up into smaller groups? And I want to offer the decision to the group. And so we literally did a game of 7-Up where everybody put their heads on the desk, and I said, we're going to, because the truth is, because power is present, there is no way that we can say, everybody raise your hand if you want to talk about this, because power is present. So I said, put your heads down, I will count. And honestly, and I told them this, that more people wanted to talk about it in the large group. But if there had been only one, and there was actually 3 people who wanted to speak in smaller groups, had there been only one person, I would have said, we got to do it in small groups, because power. And so I don't think I'm actually not answering your question around like noticing identity, but what I'm doing is identity, power is because we live in an oppressive system. Oh, everything comes back to that. Power is always present. And so identity, it's hard. That is a hard question because I don't know that I can pull it apart, because I think my brain thinks in those ways and doesn't necessarily make assumptions, but it asks questions. Like, I don't go to a place of the reason that this person of color is quiet in this predominantly white group is because it is a person of color having to be in the predominantly white group, or space has not been made for this person of color. And my brain asks the question, does that have anything to do with it? And so I'm noticing identity and noticing how power works.
And that, like asking that question, I would be willing to bet that a lot of the facilitators that we've interviewed and that we know who are not social justice facilitators would think it's completely inappropriate to say, is that person doing that because they're white? Is that person doing that because they're Christian? Is that person doing that because they're wealthy? Is that like, so let me just ask you a question. This is not me. I'm putting on like my standing in for somebody else hat.
Yes.
Are you allowed to notice that there are white people in your facilitation? Are you allowed to notice people of color?
Yes.
Are you allowed to notice there are men and women? Can you speak to that really quickly? Like, are you allowed to notice those differences? Or aren't you supposed to just see them all as participants or all as humans?
I'm sorry, I'm laughing. I'm not laughing at you. I'm just sort of like, how do you facilitate without noticing that? I'm trying to put that brain on right now. Like, how would I do that? How would I walk into a room and not ask the question of, or not notice? And it's not the problem is never noticing. That is never the problem.
It's the being okay with the noticing, right? Because I think it's the, like Sam said, like, am I allowed to notice that? Like, you definitely notice it. And then there's this perceived, I think, idea that, like, sure, of course you can notice that there's only one woman and ignore that fact, right? Or like, of course you can notice there's only, sorry, ahead, Sam.
You should, right? Not only can you should. There's that odd, and you should, because that's what I think a lot of people think social justice educators and facilitators would want them to do.
Right. Treat everyone as people, ignore their identities as quickly as possible, because otherwise you are being biased.
So the really interesting thing, and I'm realizing that you all are both putting on something else. So when you say notice them as people, I hear that as if I notice any of their other identities, I'm not noticing them as people. And that's the fallacy in the first place. And I'm like, so that then points to some of your internalized dominance, because you have then, you've discounted, of course they're people, of course they're brilliant, of course, and they're Black, and they're a woman, and that's just another part of their personhood. And to feel like you have to walk in the room and ignore or erase a part of their personhood, you're doing them a disservice, and you're doing your own facilitation a disservice. It is, know that this is all we are all situated in the system of oppression. And so as long as we're situated in the system of oppression, if you don't notice that and don't pay attention to it, not necessarily act on it. Because I think that's people get confused, that it's like, okay, I got a Black person around, I've got to make sure that they always are seen and heard and blah, blah, blah. It's like, nope, they didn't ask for that. They actually get to show up as a human being and show up in the way that they want to be. I want to create space if I notice, and sometimes noticing and naming. So if I see the room is predominantly white, and I don't have as many people of color speaking, I might say, I've heard the last few minutes have been, and I'm sure you've talked to Kathy and Jamie about this, that the last few minutes, I'm panning the room, I'm panning the dynamics that are happening in the room. The last few minutes or the last few questions, I've heard from only men or only white people. I want to check in with the group. What's going on? Or I want to make some space for people of color. They can choose to step into that space or not. And I'm not going to be like, but I made space for you. Why aren't you speaking? But I need to notice it so that I can actually recognize that those dynamics are always at work.
Yeah.
It's the status quo that's working. And so if I'm trying to interrupt the status quo, I need to actually see it happening. I need to see it at work.
Right. You got to see the water to be like, we are in water.
We're in water. Yeah.
I thank you so much, Tanya. I appreciate that. And I was really trying to just like put myself, it's difficult for me to put myself in that position as well. And I don't think if Meg and I hadn't done this show or do this project, I don't think I would have, I get it now in an odd way. And I get it from this place that seems like the person is doing the thing that they think they should be doing. And I'm like, no. So thank you so much for speaking to that. And I think that bite will be really helpful for facilitators who are being inauthentic and want to be authentic. And they feel like what they're doing right now is what they should be doing, even if it feels inauthentic.
Yeah. I go back to, I think, and this is, and I may get in trouble for saying this, but I think that this is one of the beefs that I sometimes have with the social justice education community or social justice community that we are putting on that there is a way to do this, as opposed to allowing people to be messy in it. And so I think folks who are like, well, this is how I'm supposed to see race, and I can't, I can't make mistakes around it, or I can't, because I'm terrified that somebody's going to come and bite my head off because I did it wrong. That is, we are doing a disservice to ourselves. We actually have to allow for people to make mistakes, and lovingly say, what you did there didn't work, and let me help you think through it again.
Yeah, I know. I appreciate you naming that. I feel that it's not just other people who have shoulds around, right? Like, I should show up in this way, or I should respond in this way. Like, I absolutely feel that those shoulds, and I know we're like coming down on time, and you just poked a wormhole that I'm like, we gotta come back. We gotta come back to that wormhole.
Yeah, I'm down.
Cool.
Yeah. So, that's but just know I'm with you in that place. That place of should is not just other people, right? It's also our own people and our own communities, and for me, very much an internally felt should.
Yeah.
So Tanya, the last thing that we always like to do is we like to ask every facilitator that, and this is probably what you tuned in for with the last group. We like to ask everyone the same questions, or there's this list of questions we like to ask of everyone, would be a better way of phrasing that. It's about 10 questions. And the big difference here is we're not going to ask follow-ups, and Meg is resisting a wormhole or a rabbit hole, not a worm, maybe a wormhole. Gosh, that would be a wormhole in the universe. We are not going to ask follow-ups. We're not going to chase rabbits in this case. We're just going to let you answer and then ask the next question. Okay?
Okay.
All right.
Speed round.
Okay.
As speedy as you want it to be. The first one is, what are 3 words you would use to describe facilitation?
Love, compassion, and easy.
Awesome. If you could pick one ground rule and apply it to the entire world and everyone would have to follow it, what would it be?
Oh my gosh, I love that question. Man, wow. One ground rule. Oh, listen deeply. Yeah, listen deeply.
What is something you still need to be reminded of as a facilitator?
There is no right. I think I tell myself that every time I go into facilitation. So there is no right connected to, and it is a personal reminding of, I am the joy and light of the divine. That is my movement into my facilitation whenever I am going into a facilitation opportunity. It is my grounding. And so I always have to remind myself to ground.
So you just started talking about this. What do you do right before a facilitation? So maybe it's grounding, but yeah, what do you do right before a facilitation?
I take a deep breath, and that actual, I participated in, I highly recommend this for anybody in facilitation and consulting work, the art of transformational consulting. I just did something for a week that we really did vision stands, but then he called it affirmations. I think of it though as my grounding, it's the way that I create my openness as a vessel, and I am the joy and light of the divine. And so that, with a deep breath, pulls me center, and I can facilitate my best from that space.
What do you do right after?
What do I do right after? Depending on where I am. If I'm in New York and it's been a long day of facilitation, I go to my favorite vegan restaurant. I'm vegan, and have my favorite. Oh, I love peace food. I love peace food. And so 3 actually, depends on how I want to eat. Peace food, if I want to be a little bit healthy, I have a great kale salad that I like. If I have a little extra money, Candle Cafe West. If I want some good Southern vegan food, seasoned vegan. So those are my personal advertisements. So those are, but I treat myself. Basically, I'm saying I treat myself. I treat myself. Yeah.
I wish me and Sam had those recommendations like a month ago. Awesome.
Oh, when you come back to New York, let me know.
What is a piece of facilitation advice you'd like to give your 5-year-ago self?
Stay the path. Stay the path. Yeah, keep doing the work. And actually, that's what I'd give myself right now. So, yeah, that sounds like a cheat. Not a cheat? Okay.
What still stresses you out as a facilitator?
As much as I talked about emotion sometimes still stresses me out. And there isn't much, but I know that I can still feel emotion sometimes, or I can still feel my own feelings come up about emotion. I try to, and I try to move from a place of intention. And so I try to move into my facilitation from a place of, oh, we're just here to have fun. And so, or I'm here to create space. And so that helps me keep my anxiety down.
So what do you do to manage the stress? And if that's like your thought, or particularly, I would be particularly interested in like when you feel your own emotions come up, like in that moment, what do you do to manage that stress?
Well, I have been so blessed in my work to know and be friends with Kathy O'Bear and have gotten to facilitate navigating triggers with her. And that work has been transformative for my life. And so I have embodied and taken in that navigating trigger cycle. And so when I feel it, I'm literally pulling on some of the things that Kathy teaches about of what's the story that you've created. So fix that story. Really, well, and one, I've gotten practice to where that I can recognize it coming up. It's like, oh, there it is. And so I can get a hold of it. So I thank Kathy O'Bear for offering that work to me, because it has that I work her cycle, and it has made all the difference.
We thank her on a regular basis ourselves.
Yeah.
What is a unique place you facilitated?
Ooh. Well, facilitating with leadership, we go to some obscure retreat sites because schools have the institute, but they're never on the campus of the school. They're somewhere else. I don't want to say that it's an obscure place, but I never, and please, people from Michigan, do not hate me. I did not know that there was the Upper Peninsula. I had no idea that existed until I did a Michigan Tech leadership. And I was like, where are we going? I thought we were going to be where are we somewhere down here? They're like, nope, there's something up here. And then I looked on the map and I'm like, oh, wow. And it's January.
That's up there.
Yeah. And so I stayed an extra day because I couldn't get out. So obscure. Yeah. It's not really obscure. Sometimes sounds to me like, I don't know. Well, it can be obscure. It's different from where I'd ever facilitated again.
Yeah. What's a not directly facilitation related experience you think every facilitator should have?
These are some awesome questions.
Thank
Wow. Ooh. Ask it again.
Okay, so what is a not directly facilitation related experience you think every facilitator should have?
This is going to sound so bizarre. Riding the subway in New York City.
No, that's great.
I say that mostly from a place of, I do some of my best observation on New York City subways. And I think my facilitation is fueled, one, by the observation. I take headphones out, I put phone away, and I just watch people. And so I'm tuning into the children that are looking up at their parents and having their feelings about being on the subway. I'm watching people completely disengaged. So I do some of my best practicing in observation, doing that.
That's fun. I like that idea. Is there a book that changed the way you facilitate?
This is a cheat answer. I'm going to go to Teaching for Diversity and Social Justice. And that's mostly, I say that because, and for folks who don't know, that's the book produced by the faculty at the Social Justice Education Program. And so that book, because that was my training and that was my teaching, changed my facilitation. And it was really the experience in that program. But I'm counting them as the reason that I shifted.
Do you have any online resources that you think folks should check out?
Facilitation wise, or just in general?
Could be both if you're feeling drawn by both, but yeah.
So I want to push forth the art of transformational consulting as I think a wonderful resource. The person who facilitated, Robert Gass, organizational development mind, like he's a mastermind, and a facilitation genius. I was in a master facilitation class. It was incredible. They have a resource. He works from an organization called the Social Transformation Project, and they have all of their tools are online, and it is a wealth of just goodness for folks wanting to do transformational work around a lot of topics. So that's my main place that I feed people now, because that's where I am a lot now.
All right, we'll definitely link to that in the description of this video. Cool. And the last question we have for you is, what is one piece of advice that you have for everyone listening?
Facilitate yourselves. I mean by that, learn the skills of facilitation and use them in your everyday life, because they're so valuable, so valuable. And you don't have to stand up in front of people to be a facilitator. Like your very being in a space can facilitate a space.
Love it. Oh, thank you so much, Tanya. This was an awesome conversation, and I felt like I grew as a facilitator just within the 2-hour block, not even in the reflection. I know they say that you don't learn by doing, but I disagree. I think I learned by doing in this moment. So
this has been a pleasure. I know it's not probably good to have a 5-hour show, but clearly I could keep talking.
Well, we haven't figured out commercial break, so.
Yeah, we did have that one commercial break for the dog. And if you'd be up for it, we would love the idea of doing a part 2 at some point. If you'd be up
yeah,
for it.
I would totally be up to it. Yes,
all
that
right.
would be fun. Thank you for inviting me. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely, Tanya. And if anybody else wants to connect with you, are there places where they can find you online? Are you on social media? Are you, I think you mentioned Instagram earlier. Yeah.
Yes. So my website is, you can find me www.tanyawilliams.org or www.authenticseeds.org. My Twitter is authenticseeds.org. My Instagram is authenticseeds.org, or not .org. Drop that. at Authentic Seeds and at Authentic Seeds for both Twitter and Instagram. And I'm on Facebook.
Cool.
Well, thank you again. And for anybody listening, yeah, thanks for tuning in. All right, we're going to sign off.